Hey everybody, Mark Dolfini, Landlord Coach. I am on site in a rental property and I want to show you very quickly something that is just bugs me when I talk to other landlords or other property investors, and they just don't have an idea in terms of what they're talking about in terms of maintenance things. And again, maintenance can get away from you so quickly if you're not paying attention. But today I want to talk to you very quickly about circuit breaker panels and just some basics about what it is that we're talking about. Again, so this is no tutorial on how to fix stuff. This is just to make you aware and make you a more educated landlord, make you a more educated rental property investor, owner, operator. So what I'm looking at here is a circuit breaker panel, okay? So what we've got here is you've got the main breaker up here, trying to do this backwards, the main breaker up here, and you've got several single pole breakers, and you've got a double pole breaker, and then several more single pole breakers here, and then a double pole breaker right here. So what am I talking about when I'm talking about the difference between single pole and double pole breakers? Well, it's just the amount of voltage that goes through them. Basically, when you're looking at a single pole breaker, these are just the breakers that are going to be covering, your basic outlets, your lights, your switches, things like that. Your outlet cover, your outlets, stuff that just runs basically on 110 volts. When you're looking at your double pole breakers here, the double pole breakers are really, they're dedicated circuits that are for specifically 240 volt appliances, right? So in cases like that, you'd be looking at your electric dryers, your electric water heaters, your outside air conditioning units, right? Those are all 220 volt dedicated circuits. What I mean by dedicated circuit, it means that this can't be shared. This circuit is not shared with anything else, right? That you can't run an electric dryer and a water heater on the same 220 volt circuit. Sometimes you will run into that though, and where somebody's not really knowing what they're doing or just being dangerous, and or they're out of space on the circuit breaker panel. Like there's no more. If I were to knock this little knockout here, and you see the little metal piece sticking out, that's called a stab. So if there's no more stabs, all the stabs are being used, like the panel's full. Sometimes you'll see what's a condition called a double tap, where they'll run one wire or two wires into one circuit breaker. Generally, you'll see that on the single pole breakers. Generally not, you're going to see that on a double pole. But again, people just do some crazy, goofy stuff, and it's unsafe. So you just need to know that condition needs to be fixed. So again, if you say you get an inspection report back and you're seeing this, and you're not really sure what to do, or you get it back from an electrician because they're saying to you, hey, this situation exists, so we need to fix it. It's unsafe. Just know that. And some of the situations here, like you're going to see, like I've got this one here will shut off this light that's illuminating this. Okay, so that will shut off there. But you'll see these little 20 and this little 15, or this is 20 and 20, and then this is 15. You might not be able to see it in the video. But what does that mean? Well, that's basically the amount of amperage on that circuit, that basically the protection for that circuit. Now, the circuit breaker, it needs to be the weakest link in the chain, right? So the wiring doesn't burn up inside the wall, but the breaker will trip before the wiring burns up, right? So that's the amperage is the amount of draw. If you want to do your homework on amperage and voltage and all that, that's not the purpose of this video. But just understand that this is the weakest link in the chain. So if I open up this panel and I look at the wiring and all the wiring that runs through all the way through, through on this one circuit, that's a 20 amp breaker. So there should be no less than 12 gauge wiring on that 20 amp circuit. Okay, because 12 gauge wiring is rated for 20 amps. So the 15, on the other hand, that is rated, you'd be looking at no less than 14 gauge wire. So your 14 gauge wire is rated for 15 amps. Now, as the gauge of the wire gets higher in number, it gets thinner. So in other words, if you have a 10 gauge wire, it's a real fat wire versus a 22 gauge wire, which is like phone wire, right? Like you might see that in network cabling and stuff like that. So it gets real small. So again, the thicker the wire, the lower the number. But again, so let's say I open this up and I look at this, the wire that's running into it is a 14 gauge wire and it's on a 20 amp breaker. That's wrong. Basically, what you've created is a filament, basically a fuse inside your wall, because that wire, I mean, you could overload that circuit before the breaker will trip, and then obviously it gets hot and can cause a fire inside the walls. The reason I tell you this is because sometimes you'll get handymen that don't know what they're doing, and they're like, well, I had that 20 amp breaker in my in my toolbox. I just swapped it out with from a 15 and went to 20. Well, that's not okay. You need to make sure that you've got people who know what they're doing and not creating an unsafe condition inside your walls. So that's why I say, it's really pays to make sure that you know what's going on with the quality of work that's going on inside your rental properties. That's why I like, again, I have a general knowledge of a lot of different things. I'm pretty good with electrical, but even still, there's just sometimes I know, like, I'm not going to, there's just stuff I know I'm not going to mess with. And quite frankly, once you take this panel off, it's really unsafe for a lot of people if you don't know what to touch, if you don't know what you're doing, because again, the 220 volts will kill you. 110 will ruin your day, but 220 will stop your day. I mean, and I really don't want anybody opening this up and not knowing what they're doing. But again, if you're at a situation where you're out of capacity, you're out of stabs, yeah, you can use doublers. So in other words, like that, you can take a single pole breaker like this and put in basically what's a doubler, which basically means it's two breakers that take up one stab. And but sometimes you're just out of capacity, and what that means is you have to, you basically have to swap this out for a larger, higher capacity breaker panel. And sometimes means you have to update the service, which means updating the service wire, which means you have to get a thicker wire that runs from here all the way out to the meter base. And that can be a giant pain in the ass, especially if you've got a really long run between here and the meter. So that can certainly get expensive. But it's always good to have a contractor that you really trust and know that you're going to get a really good answer. If it's always good to get multiple opinions, though. Don't just rest on one person's thought. There are varying levels of quality in terms of the type of work that can get done. Sometimes electrical contractors can get really busy, and sometimes they're slow, and the pricing can vary based on how busy they are. So I would suggest, in that particular case, if they're telling you, something like this where you're kind of out of capacity, make sure that you understand, don't just use this video as the only thing that you're going to learn from. Go out there and educate yourself so you can be an educated investor and know what it is exactly that they're talking about, and you know that the quality work is being done and you're not making an unsafe condition for anybody, okay? Please make sure that you're placing a value on your free time, because if you don't, someone else will. This is why I am telling you that you sometimes just need someone who knows what they're doing rather than you trying to do all the work yourself. Okay? Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care.